Lee Grandin, Managing Director of award-winning Landlord Mortgages, chats with savvy client in Paddington, London.
Today we've got an interesting appointment. It's a guy that I got from TikTok. He saw our social media account. He has a property just off Paddington, lovely property. It is grade 2 listed. It is worth about 3-bed flat, and he's looking to potentially refinance it to release some money to purchase another property to live in. So we're going to look at the figures, see if it stacks up for rental. It looks quite promising. Maybe he'll get £100 to £200 per week, which will release about 10% loan to value, maybe a little bit more. But yes, we'll take you then.
My issue right now, and I've got to make this decision soon. Okay, this thing developed it. It's good. It works. Now, I've got to figure out, okay, looking at the way that the legislation's now working, looking at the way that the tax system is now working, looking at my own finances, looking at what I could potentially get from the banks, looking as to what's coming up next in the current environment, at a macro level, what's happening, at a micro level, what's happening in my area. I think you're absolutely right. People have to consider all of these things when they're deciding what to do next.
And I think there's so many variables that it's not just a quick answer, yes or no. And as you found when you were looking at the rentals potential on this property, it suddenly shocked you that they're quite good, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the issue now for me is I need to do a proper analysis, and this is the tough bit. I've got to look at, okay, so if I want to sell this, it does make life a lot easier in a sense where I don't have to then worry about capital gains tax. Because it's my primary home. I sell it, I move on. But then there's a lot of transitional costs that I've got to take into account when I want to buy the next one. So I think you've got to do some sort of total cost of ownership, a TCO type of model, which would be helpful to figure out, okay, so if I was to sell this, buy something new, fix it, etc., what's the total kind of cost that I've got to take into account? Because for the next one that I've got to, okay, when I sell this, there is a hefty chunk of money that goes to the real estate agents.
Yeah, very true.
There is a hefty chunk. Okay, I've got to, in order to buy the next one, maybe I'm going to need a buying agency. I don't know. Then there's the moving out, all those fun bits.
The stressy part.
The stressy part, right? So there's all those things. Whereas if I can then look at the rental, as you said, I couldn't actually believe some of the rentals that the estate agents.
So just touch on the rental bit. Did they actually give you real life lets?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I was surprised. So they've actually come back ever since we spoke.
Yeah.
They've come back with a couple of examples
on
the street.
On the street.
The street where they're so, from their perspective is obviously you ban these lettings in different areas. So if people are looking in an area like this where you're close to Hyde Park, you're close to Oxford Street, you're close to Paddington Station, 15 minutes you're in Heathrow, they kind of say, okay, so now you've got these certain groups of people that because of the geographic nature of the place, they want to be in this area. Okay, fine. So that's the initial thing they look at. Then they say, okay, you're going to have different budgets within this geography that you can cater for. So yes, there will be students.
Yeah.
So they have a certain requirement. They need a certain finish, etc. But then you will have maybe professional couple. They are looking to entertain. They need something unique, something of this nature.
Yeah.
So then your rental may increase, obviously, because of that. So they did the calculation. They showed me a couple of things above, below, and they think, look, this is the area that we think we're going to approach if you go down that path.
That's
now,
it.
I think for me, what I've got to do now is there's a huge amount of proper calculations that I've got to do. And, you know, option A, option B. Option A being I sell, move on to the next one. And I've got to do this, not just the initial transaction period. This is something that, okay, say I take the next 5 to 10 years into account. Because it gets back to this concept of, you know, there is this old wisdom, if you buy, hold, don't ever sell. Right? And I think everyone talks about that a lot.
I think if you look at some landlords from years gone by, when we started the business in '98, a lot of our landlords held the properties, and then they went into development work linked to buying the properties, and that worked very well. When it got to the credit crunch, that changed the dynamics somewhat, and a lot of our landlords stopped buying for a period of time. But that's starting back up now. It just depends on whether you want to have like a residual income from property, or you prefer to buy and sell and make money by the development.
So I guess that's the bit I'm interested in. 2008, credit crunch. What actually changed? Is it because it became harder to finance it? Is it because the government changed the regulations when it comes to being a landlord, holding those extra properties? I guess, I mean, we all know the fact that, okay, government changed some of the ways that you can expense things, etc. It you know, makes it quite hard. So then it's a matter of, okay, coming up with some sort of structure that could potentially work, whether it's in a company, whether it's in a trust, whatever it is.
Yeah.
That's the other thing I've got to take into account as to what do I do going forward.
Ability to increase the number of bedrooms.
Yep.
Now, this is something that we see regular with landlords. They may buy a property, renovate it, but if they can add a bedroom, that adds value, but also adds rental income. So how do you target the right property? What are you looking for?
Okay, so that's the third level of where you can add value. When it comes to adding a bedroom, it is a little bit tough because obviously the building's been around for a long time. The previous owner, you know, most people would have thought of that. So you've got to look at, okay, why didn't they do it previously? Right? So I think...
So that's interesting, isn't it? So you say, why hasn't it been done? Is there a problem?
So I think that's the key point. Everybody knows that if you add an extra bedroom to a flat, obviously you're going to raise the rental income, you're going to raise the actual value of the property itself, etc., etc. So it's not so much of, okay, the issue becomes there's two problems there. There's two issues there. One is the actual technical layout that you've got to have a bit of imagination. And number two is the regulatory issue, which is around, you know, if it is a leasehold, you've got to get the approval from the leaseholder, and then you've got to get the approval from, especially if it's a grade 2 listed, you've got to get the approval from the council because it could be listed, there could be technical issues, building control comes and says, fire, due to the fire regulations, which actually has become a real big issue for them now. Everything seems to be centered around making sure that you have a point of egress within the flat that's accessible and it's easy to achieve. So that third bedroom or that second bedroom, whilst it's plainly obvious that, you know, you could do something around it, it actually takes a lot of imagination for the layout bit and effort. So I'll give you a perfect example for this place. This was originally a 2-bedroom. In order to turn it into a 3-bedroom, but a 3-bedroom that actually makes sense. Not a 3-bedroom where it's kind of like that third room is a 1.5 meter by 2 meter. And yes, it does have a window, but you can't really use it as a... So you've got to if you're going to reconfigure, you have to do it properly. So for this one, for example, we had to take down a whole soil stack.
Oh, wow.
And that was tough because you not only had about 1.5 meters of rubble to cut through, you also, within the rubble, there was also an electric, gas,
Jesus,
and a water pipe.
Amazing.
That fit that was feeding the whole building. And that was an absolute nightmare. Every single architect said to us, if you try to cut through this, this is going to be painful. I had a couple of builders that actually refused. They said, look, we know you want to do that, but you're crazy. We're not interested.
So why did you persevere if it was so difficult?
Look, I think, I mean, the two things that we did here, go through that soil stack, and B, we changed the front entrance.
Right.
In order to then make the symmetry work. Because I could see the vision in the sense that by going through the soil stack and putting a corridor where the soil stack used to be, what it'll do is it'll bring in a lot of natural light,
okay.
Number one. Number two, easily accessible. Number three, it will reduce the corridor space. Look, again, within any building, corridor space sometimes becomes dead space. Right? So if you can redesign it in such a way that you can reduce the corridor space, you can bring in more light, then yeah, this definitely made sense, and we had to do it. And now that we've done it, you can actually then see that the bedrooms that we have are a proper size.
So your skill set, I mean, a lot of people that may be watching this will decide, how does this guy know so much?
Yeah.
You know, it's quite incredible to do what you've done and see the foresight to do it.
Look, I think I do, again, it gets back to focusing on the areas where you have not an unfair advantage, but you have an advantage. So my background is civil engineer.
Okay, yeah.
On top of that, I've got a master's in construction management. On top of that, I've worked for banks for many years. On top of that, for work experience, I've worked for a planning department within a council back in Australia. So I've seen and I've lived most of this stuff. And for me, it's more of a passion than an actual something that for fun, I sometimes download the floor plans of apartments, and for fun, I kind of play around with it.
Oh, wow.
So, well, if you bring the bathroom here and put the kitchen over there, it'll increase the usable space, etc. So it's actually, for me, it's like a puzzle as well. Wow. But then that's the technical bit, that's the imaginative bit, that's the architectural bit. But then on the other hand, you've got the fun bits that you go through with the council, with the building control. So for me, that's the contract management bit, which is what I also do for my 9 to 5, which is contract management procurement. So I guess for me, this kind of stuff is actually, a lot of it is quite fun.
So one of the parts you just touched on there is your ability to have a floor plan and like a jigsaw puzzle, be able to move things about to make it work. Mm-hmm. So my landlords will be very interested in your service.
Oh, okay.
So maybe we could do something.
Yeah, definitely. Look, actually,
consultancy of some point.
Yeah, look, that's actually it's a really interesting area. Floor plan designing is one of those things that can either add a lot of value, or it can make life really difficult for when you're trying to live there, but also make life really difficult when you're trying to actually renovate. If you don't consider that I am going to have run services from this new area that I want to put the kitchen in, and if you don't have proper access points as to, okay, where do we run that to? Because there's a certain level of drop that you have to take into account when you're putting a kitchen somewhere. These are all the fun things that you do have to take into account within your puzzle.
The involvement of the council.
Mm-hmm.
So are they open to adding bedrooms to properties? What's the general consensus?
Look, officially they have to follow certain guidelines, especially when it comes to listed buildings. So that's something that obviously it's not just a structural issue, but it's also the aesthetics factor. If you do have some form of aesthetic that's been there for the past 100, 200 years, they are not going to be too open to knocking that stuff down in order for you to have an open plan, blah, blah, blah. So you've got to approach this from a pragmatic, sensible kind of view that, okay, I have X, Y, Z. The question then becomes, can you somehow enhance that feature? So there'll be certain bits that if you can enhance it, if you can add to it, and not just, from both the materials, the method of the work, and the design element, if you can work with them, it's going to make your life a lot easier. If you go in there with the premise of currently it's a 1-bedroom, I want to make it a 2-bedroom, but these are the features that I'm going to enhance. Or, I'm going from a 2 to a 3-bedroom, It has X, Y, Z, and this is what we want to do. And I think that's the key point, because they're very particular about the way you go about doing things. And I'll give you an example, because I think this is an important question.
Interesting.
When I changed the front door, and I wanted to change the front door from one particular area to the next. Now, obviously, I had to get the approval from the freeholder. And then when I went to the council, and this is the planning department, they were so adamant about, okay, now the kind of doors that was on these types of buildings was the 4-panel. It needs to be X high, Y width, etc. It needs to have this type of finish. Obviously, there's the fire rating that's associated. So you have all of these issues to take into account. But if you work with them, because they are trying to preserve part of our history. And I think, you hear this from a lot of people that do these types of older buildings, and they do kind of feel like the custodian rather than an owner. And I think that's a really key point to take into account when you're talking to these guys, because from a heritage, whether it's heritage listers, grade listed, they are trying to preserve a certain part of our history. Work with them. But at the same time, try to come up with a way where you can get in that extra bedroom. There is a way. There will always be a way.
There's always a way.
But you've just got to figure that out.
Always the way when you have your charm.
Yes, of course.
So they were quite happy in the end to allow you to add the bedroom, and that has provided a large uplift in value.
Absolutely.
And we were going to look at your figures to see if it's viable to switch this property onto a buy-to-let mortgage.
Yeah.
The process is called a let to buy. What you're doing is you're letting out your existing home to purchase a new home. Potentially.
Yeah.
So it's a case of, there might be some limitations. So maybe best that we look through the figures, and then you can chew them over and see where we go from there.